Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning on the Emergency Connectivity Fund, known as ECF, and a step-by-step guide for libraries and K-12 schools for that process. Huge thank you to Dell Technologies and Intel for sponsoring this webinar and for joining us here today. We're now going to get started with our webinar. I'd like to start today first by introducing our panelists this morning. First, myself, I am Gabby Rowe. I am the principal of Grow Associates, a strategy consulting and E-rate consulting practice based out of Houston, Texas. Now I'd like to pass it to Rob Silverberg from Dell Technologies, who has joined us today. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Rob Silverberg with Dell Technologies. I'm proud to represent Dell and help educate our schools and libraries on how to apply for this funding, what the limitations are, what the process is, and how we can help to provide connectivity to those underserved.
Thank you so much, Rob. And that really is the essence of what this webinar will be about today as we present the ECF opportunity to you, the ways in which you can apply, eligibility criteria, and some use cases and some programs that you will hear more from Rob Silverberg about from Dell. And then, of course, opening it up to a Q&A. If you have questions through the course of this webinar, please post those in the Q&A, and you'll see there are a number of other members of both Dell and Intel who are online with us this morning. They will be answering your questions in the Q&A in the chat, and they will also be available later on during the Q&A. I will, of course, be available to answer questions about the ECF program. And now I'd like to start our program for today. So what is the Emergency Connectivity Fund? As part of the American Rescue Plan, a fund of $7.2 billion was established specifically to focus on home connectivity. All school districts, nonprofit schools, and libraries have access to this fund. And those are for forward expenses, which is very important to remember when thinking about ECF. This is not a reimbursement program for things that you spent money on during COVID. These are for expenses between July 1st of 2021, which has just passed, through June 30th of next year. So these are for expenses that you are incurring right now or will incur in order to help your communities have access to home connectivity, whether that is through a lending program out of your library, a mobile library bus, or of course, home connectivity programs coming from our K-12 schools. Applications opened a few weeks ago on June 29th and will close 45 days later, which is August 13th. There is no priority given to when you get it in during those 45-day during that 45-day window. We will talk a little bit later about what that priority does look like, though. All expenses have to be for home-based connectivity. That was the purpose of this connectivity fund as part of the American Rescue Plan. And what that means, as I mentioned earlier for libraries, is they must be lending programs. So anything that takes place within the walls of the library, whether that's desktop computing or access within the library itself, that is not considered part of ECF. However, lending programs of hotspots, laptops, broadband service, those are all acceptable for libraries. A mobile library bus that provides connectivity, that is acceptable. We'll talk about those programs in just a minute. And for K-12 schools, it is laptops and connectivity that you are enabling for students in their homes. Again, we'll touch on that eligibility a bit more in just a minute. So for those eligibility criteria for libraries, a laptop lending program where you are signing out laptops to your members is absolutely eligible. A long-term hotspot lending program, whether that program is part of a laptop program or standalone by itself, that is an acceptable use of funds for ECF. And of course, as I mentioned, hotspots on library vehicles that are moving throughout your community, that service on those mobile vehicles, that connectivity is acceptable as well. For K-12 schools, the connectivity requirements are slightly different. For a staff member or student that is receiving a laptop or connectivity from ECF funding, they have to prove that, or the district has to prove that that student or staff member did not have adequate connectivity or an adequate device prior to the ECF purchase. The connectivity or device must be used primarily at home, not stored at school. It can go back and forth from school to home, but its primary base of use has to be in the home environment. Connectivity has to be registered to an identifiable staff member or student. It can't be shared. So for example, it can't be off a cart that students will take out with them. And it can't be part of a lending program where a student may or may not take that device home. So this is a place where the K-12 school requirements differ quite significantly from libraries. Libraries are absolutely able to do those lending programs, but unfortunately schools cannot. They must connect a device, whether that's a connectivity device or a laptop or a computer. They must connect that with an identifiable student or staff member, and that device must leave the school building to go home. For both libraries and K-12, one of the universal requirements of this program is that all eligibility records, so the records of students, the records of your program, if you're a library, must be kept for 10 years. For those of you who have done grant funding or federal funding in the past, that period of time is typically 7 years. Because this program is being implemented so quickly, and it is going to take the federal government some time to audit the program, they're asking that all libraries in K-12 schools keep those records for 10 years. If records or if devices are lost during the course of that 10-year period, there are disposal forms that the FCC provides in order for you to keep that as part of that long audit record. So SIPA filtering, this is often a question that comes up when we talk about anything related to what could have been E-rate or online funding from the federal government, and is a very important criteria. So for libraries, all on-site and off-site computers purchased with ECF must be SIPA compliant. And the reason we say on-site there, even though we have said these cannot be used in the library, when you have a lending program, those computers are going to spend some time in the library moving in and out. They must be, for all of the different uses they have, they must be SIPA compliant. If a library receives E-rate funds, all outside of ECF, all hotspots that they purchase for a lending program must be SIPA compliant. The only exception to SIPA compliance for libraries is if you purchase hotspots alone with no service from ECF and you are not receiving E-rate funds already, the hotspots themselves may be bought with ECF funds without resident SIPA filtering. However, the service must be bought with non-ECF funds if those are in fact non-SIPA compliant devices. Our advice to libraries in this is you are best to ensure that you have SIPA filtering on all your devices to meet the eligibility requirements. For schools, there are no exceptions for computers and hotspots. All of them must be SIPA compliant. Fixed broadband is the only exception, where it is not necessary for fixed broadband being brought into the home to be SIPA compliant, as long as a student or staff member is using that with a SIPA compliant computer. So a computer that is issued by the district that has that SIPA compliance embedded into the computer. So what are the questions that we encourage libraries and K-12 programs to be asking themselves at this point in the process? The first and most important is, does your library or school currently participate in E-rate? The second is your library or school registered on sam.gov, which is the way in which you get paid by ECF? Third, if you are a library, have you modified your program to meet the lending requirements for ECF or lending program. And we're going to go over what that looks like in just a minute. And then, of course, do you have the link to the ECF application? And we're about to answer all of these questions for you. So first, are you an E-rate school already? If you are, you have an FCC registration number somewhere in your organization. If you are the person who has administered in the past, then you can skip this step because you will already have access to the CORE's webpage for your FCC registration number. However, if your institution has not received E-rate funds in the past, or you have not been the E-rate administrator off of your email, then you need to do the following steps. You go to the FCC's core webpage that you see listed here, and we will be sharing this deck, this presentation with all registrants for this webinar. And then once you go onto that, you create a username and password attached to your email, and you will receive an automated email to verify your account. Once that account is activated, register for a new FRN if you are not in an institution that's participated in E-rate. However, if you are simply a new administrator, then you need to go to the button that says associate username to FRN so that your email address can be associated with the existing FRN for your institution. After you provide that information, CORES will generate a new registration number that is attached to your email and your username, and that will allow you to get the correct information to fill into your ECF application that we'll show you the link to in just a minute. You then need to register for sam.gov. In order to do this, you go to sam.gov and you register for a SAM account with the following information. This is simply so that the federal government, the FCC, can send you the funds if you file an ECF application that is in fact eligible. To do that, we suggest you get this information listed here ahead of time so that you can fill the application in quickly. And that will be your DUNS number, your Data Universal Numbering System number, your taxpayer identification number. And again, these are for your institution. The bank routing number for your institution, account number, and bank account type. And anyone who handles the operations and payables and receivables in your organization will be able to provide you with this information so that they can set up an electronic funds transfer, which is how you're going to receive your ECF funds. Once you register, you should receive a confirmation email. And I would encourage that you share that confirmation email with the operations and business manager for your organization so that they are prepared when an electronic transfer is made at the conclusion of your ECF process. In order to modify your library plans to meet ECF acceptable policies, you will have to change your acceptable use policy for your library by inserting the paragraph that is shown on this screen. You will, of course, have to insert the devices that are covered by it, whether it's tablets or hotspots or internet access. And when you fill that in, this has to be supplied with the paperwork that you give to everyone who will be participating in your lending program. Again, we will be supplying this information to you as part of this presentation. Additionally, you will have to ensure that ECF certification language is signed by everyone who participates in your lending program, no matter what kind of device it is that you are lending out to them. It's as simple as repeating in the paperwork the paragraph that you see here, and having the patron participating in lending sign at exactly that place. It can't be a multiple signature at the bottom of a document. You have to insert a signature immediately after this paragraph with the date that that was signed. Again, you will find that language in this deck when you receive it. And then you are to the place where you find your ECF link. For those of you who have filed for E-rate before, When you get to the application link, it will take you to USAC, which is exactly the same portal that you have historically used for E-rate. There were a number of problems with this portal at the very beginning of the application period, which started on June 29th. Those challenges seem to have been corrected. So if you had trouble logging on in the early going, please go back again using this link to go directly to the Emergency Connectivity Fund page, which has a very large box at the top of the screen that shows you where to click to go to the application itself. And again, in order to fill out that application, you will need that FCC registration number we talked about a couple of slides ago, and you will also need to identify your sam.gov registration number, which you also received as we showed earlier, so that they will know how to pay you after the application period. So just a few words on the role of libraries prior to my passing this over to Rob at Dell, and wanted to say that the digital skills gap is significant. I think for those of you who are on this webinar who were from schools, you experienced that firsthand with so many of our students across the country having to switch to remote learning. And many of you worked very hard to make sure that you closed that gap as best you could during that period. But that gap has not closed. And for libraries, there is a real opportunity now to close that gap, not just for students, but also for the adults in their community that do not necessarily have the skills necessary to take advantage of many of the opportunities and jobs that are opening up in our communities. These lending programs have proven to be very successful in many large cities across the country. Here in Houston, where I am based, we have a very successful program functioning out of our library system. There are many documents, templates of lending plans for both laptops and hotspots. We will be attaching the links to those template programs to this deck when we send that out to you as libraries. And we encourage you to consider participating in a lending program for your communities if you have not done so already. So I am now going to pass the torch, so to speak, for the webinar over to Rob. And Rob, please let me know when you would like me to advance the slides forward for you.
Will do, and thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So the focus here and the focus of this grant is around solving the digital divide. Those underserved and disconnected communities across our nation that don't have access to devices, don't have access to internet, and don't have access to potentially digital literacy and training programs that they might need. Next slide, please. And understanding the digital divide is an important place to start. Understanding the problems that we have across our country, how many people we have that do not have access, and that this program, this Emergency Connectivity Fund, can help to address. So if you look at the graphic here, you have a disparity among both, there we go, right back. So 12 million students in the United States lack adequate internet or computing devices. Of those, 7 million are Black or Hispanic. So clearly we need to solve that problem nationally. We also have a problem with rural communities that are disconnected or underserved. And as we look at how to bring connectivity, how to bring devices, put them in the hands of those that are underserved, that's clearly a problem that we're looking to address. It's also important to note that 82% of middle skill jobs require digital literacy. For those that are disconnected and don't have access to compute and connectivity, they're missing out on that opportunity to participate in the digital economy. So as we look at this fund, as we look at the ability to put devices in the hands of underserved communities, we're really changing the way our disconnected communities can interact, can gain access to opportunities, remote work, remote school. These are very important aspects of modern society. Next slide, please. And it goes beyond just the devices. Clearly, this grant is focused on access, that second part of the problem, getting the device into the hands of those people who don't have it, getting connectivity in the hands of those that don't have it. But we also need to look a little bit more holistically at the problem and how we're going to solve it. The initial focus on collaboration, intentional collaboration for public and private sectors to focus on how we're going to solve digital inclusion issues. We also know that there's going to be a potential need for skills. Those people who are handed a computer for the very first time may not even know where the on-off button is. And when someone tells them to log in, they may not know what that means, or open a web browser. What's a web browser? So this is where our schools and libraries really need those programs to be able to address digital literacy and a lot of focus on bringing some of these people online that don't even understand where the on-off button is. Then also we want to promote that this is a community problem. This is where we can band together as a community to bring the right skills, the right help, the right support. In some cases, that's one-on-one, hands-on coaching and tutoring and mentoring. And that's where our library personnel, our schools can actively help to bring these people up to speed. Next slide, please. So we put together some specific tablets that are compliant with the rules of ECF. So if you look at how you get the right device in the hands of those remote workers, those remote school, there's specific offerings that we're promoting as a solution to this funding. We also understand the challenge that these offerings have to be below $400 in order to be fully funded by ECF funding. And for the air cards or hotspots, those have to be under $250. So we've created specific discount packages for many of these offerings to bring it down below that $400 upper price limit. I want to call out a couple of these. There's both Latitude Windows machines as well as Chromebooks. Chromebooks, of course, being very highly used in our school system. I also want to call out that the Chromebook 3100 11-inch notebook comes with LTE as an available option. So it can directly connect to a cellular provider without a need for an additional air card. Another key thing about these devices is that they're made for students and they're made to be easy to use and easy to understand. So they're a perfect fit for the requirements of this ECF grant. Next slide, please. So Dell has also partnered with a company called Kajit, and we have the partnership which allows us to provide these solutions, which are created by Kajit for connectivity. So if you're looking for connectivity, both the device and the connectivity, you can get both from Dell, the device as well as the connectivity. And the initial piece is the Kajit Smart Spot, which is that hotspot that's specifically designed for student use. Then there's the Smart Bus, which allows you to create an entire connectivity solution for a school bus. Very important for school buses going out to rural areas, perhaps to remote communities where they're going to spend significant time on the bus. That could be learning time. That can be time where they're online doing homework. And then lastly, the Kajit Sentinel portal. This is the ability to provide that filtering, the SIPA requirements that can be met with the Sentinel portal. So all these are available from Dell and are a complete solution for this, this requirement. So that's what I have, and thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Rob. And please, if any of you have questions about the slides that you just showed, that Rob just showed, please pop those into the Q&A, and he's available to answer those questions then as well.
Yeah, and I want to address one question that I just saw in the chat. Yes, you can purchase devices that are more than $400, but you'll only be reimbursed up to $400 from the federal government through the ECF grant, but you're fine to buy devices that are more expensive if you choose.
And to build on that, Rob, you will be asked the cost of your devices in the ECF application. You are not capped, as Rob just said, by putting $400 in there, but they will use that to calculate how much you will get on your reimbursement. And again, those numbers, to reiterate, are $400 for devices, computing devices, and $250 for connectivity. And that means the cost of the hotspot plus the cost of service running through that end date, which, to remind everyone, is June 30th, 2022. So one thing before we get to Q&A that I would like to highlight for everyone is we are doing 2 open office hours sessions for anyone who registered for this webinar. And in those office hours, it will be in a Zoom format, not in a webinar format, so that you can ask really specific, detailed questions, both about your application and any questions that you might have about that are device specific. So both myself and the Grow Associates E-Rate consultants will be on these open hour sessions, as will members of the Dell and Intel staff. So you'll have both of us to ask direct questions that apply specifically to your library or K-12. On the Grow side, we have to date advised about 2,000 ECF filers on their applications. So we strongly encourage you, if you're considering this program, to come to one of these 2 open office sessions and ask your questions there. But now let's move forward to the Q&A, and I am going to ask for Kate Sylvain, who's a member of the Grow team, to please let us know if there are questions for either myself or for Rob.
Thanks, Gabby. Just a couple of questions that have come through regarding ECF. One in general, as far as who the equipment can be loaned to. Does it have to be students, or can it be loaned to adults as well?
For library lending programs, it can be loaned to anyone who is qualified as a patron in your library. And so if you have age requirements around your library cards, for example, it has to meet those same requirements, but it can be lent to anyone who qualifies as a patron in your community, all the way from students up through senior citizens.
And then to go off that, for K through 12, is this just for students, or can schools also purchase equipment for teachers?
Schools can purchase 1 device and 1 form of connectivity for every student and every teacher in the district, as long as they can meet eligibility requirements. So to remind you, one of those eligibility requirements is that you have to provide proof that the student or staff member did not have an adequate device at the time of your ECF purchase. It used to be at the very beginning, they put in that they couldn't have any device. That's extremely difficult to mandate, and adequate is, as you can imagine, a fairly gray term. So what we have advised schools is you need to be able to prove that you did not hand out a device to every single student and every single teacher last year. Or if you did do that, many of those devices are now either lost or out of date or not appropriate for home use. Or you can prove that many of those student devices are required academically to be in the school building 24/7. Therefore, those students no longer have adequate devices, and therefore you can buy additional devices under that eligibility umbrella. I will at this point, though, talk about prioritization. The way in which prioritization will take place is, as I said, it will not be based on when you get your application in that 45-day period, but will instead be based on your E-rate percentage. If you have already participated in the E-rate program, or the E-rate percentage that is established when you get your FCC registration. And that is directly connected to the percentage or number of economically disadvantaged students in your school district, or the location based on economic need of your library program. And based on other programs that you run, you should be able to very quickly find out from within your organization where you fall. And obviously those districts and libraries that are in more affluent communities or have lower economically disadvantaged populations are going to be at risk of not getting reimbursed by ECF if the money is all used up during the 45-day period. So if there are more than $77.2 billion worth of applications.
Thank you. In regards to what is covered, is it just hardware? Are services covered? And is any maintenance covered?
There is no service and maintenance covered by ECF. It is extremely important that when you submit your invoices that you break those things out. When you submit the invoices to ECF. It is only the device that is covered. And as I said earlier, it is only for service. It is for service for hotspots, but only through the June 30th, 2022 date.
Great.
I had one clarification on there. You are the Chrome license is an acceptable item as long as it is tied into the device. Prices, you still have to have that single price point. You also can have the reasonable service, which is up to 3 years, I believe, in there, but it can't be an additional service cost.
It has to be bundled with the price of the computer, and it can't be something that is paid over time or at a date later than June 30th, 2022. So several people have asked questions about financing. Devices can be financed, but only in short term. So the money must be spent by the district on or before that June 30th, 2022 date. So nothing can be financed beyond that date.
Thank you. And can we have a little clarification on who is eligible? Are academic libraries just public libraries? There's a few questions as to exactly who can apply for this grant.
All libraries that have nonprofit, not-for-profit status can apply for ECF, whether they are a narrower academic library, whether they are a public library, whether they are a library institution that is associated with other academic institutions. As long as they are a nonprofit standalone library in terms of their operations, they are able to apply for these ECF funds.
Thank you. How do you know how bus Wi-Fi would be calculated for reimbursement? Would that just qualify for the 250, or would there be more available for something like that?
It will only qualify for the $250 of service, and that is a question that both schools and libraries have asked many times. It's one of the challenges in the way that this program is set up. It is not possible to calculate the number of students or the number of patrons that might impact, and so that is done on a single device, single service standpoint.
Is ECF allowing the service provider to submit on behalf of a library or school and directly reimbursing the service provider?
No, unfortunately, that is not being allowed in the ECF plan. And I know that is more typical of E-Rate's historical programs. But in ECF, the institution must file the initial ECF application. There is the possibility on that ECF application to choose an E-Rate consultant that will support you in the process. So for example, helping you upload invoices, et cetera. But it is not possible for either a provider or a consultant to submit that application for you in advance.
Thank you. What happens if an individual gets a device or means to connect later on in the process? Do libraries and schools have to reclaim the device at that time?
If it is for a library that is in a lending program, you do not have the same criteria for adequate service the way schools do have that. So that does not apply to libraries. For libraries, you must demonstrate the viability of your lending program, which are you can show through the template that we're going to be sending you of a description of your program. For schools, however, if a student either leaves the district or gets service on their own and no longer needs your service, you need to fill out a disposal or amendment form that will be provided by the FCC that will allow you to keep a record of how that machine moved from one individual of need in your district to another. What you cannot do with that device or that service is begin to use it in the school building or change the purpose of the use. So for example, using it as a lending computer in your computer lab. It must be brought back in and lent out subsequently to another student for exactly the same purpose.
Great. And lastly, specifically related to ECF, is there any leeway as far as the dates of qualification? If a library has already maybe purchased hotspots within, the last couple of months, will the ECF consider those, or is it just from the July 1st date?
Unfortunately, there is no leeway in those dates. The FCC has made it very clear that they will make no exceptions to that 45-day window for applications, and they will make no exceptions to that July 1st through June 30th, 22 date. They have, however, said that if there is funding left over after this first 45-day application period, they're going to open a second ECF application that's going to be retroactive. That is going to cover expenses that that libraries and school districts spent over the last year. So from the year prior to that July 1st date.
Great. And then there's one final question that may be for you, but also maybe for our Dell representatives. Can anyone clarify, can Chromebooks and licenses be purchased separately, or does that all have to be bundled together?
If you want to use the ECF funding to cover the Chrome license cost, then it cannot be a separate line item cost. It needs to be bundled.
Correct.
Thank you.
And to Billy's point, it not only has to be purchased with the device, it has to be included in the price of the device. It cannot even be listed separately on the invoice as its own standalone line item.
Wonderful. I think that's all we have right now for questions.
Fantastic. Well, would you like to say a few words to close, Rob?
Yes, I think this has been very informative. I've learned a lot as well from all the details that you provided. But this program is really important to help our communities, to bring connectivity to disconnected individuals and families. And we're very focused on helping our libraries and schools achieve those goals.
Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you to all of our Dell friends who are on supporting us today and our friends from Intel. I'd like to close by saying you will receive a copy of this deck, a recording of this webinar. You will also receive registration links to those 2 open office hours. You don't have to come to both. You can come to both. We encourage you to invite anyone else in your institution that you think would benefit from those open office hours. Please sign up. We will be holding those next Tuesday and next Thursday at 9 a.m. and 12 noon, respectively. So we look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you can benefit from the presentation materials and the links that we are going to follow this webinar with. Again, thank you so much for spending your time with us, and good luck in this ECF process. We think our students and our communities will benefit.